last week, Sarah had asked what Dr. Hammer had talked about the difference of all of us not being able to be created equal. Do you guys remember her asking that question? If you don't, that's fine. Well, in part of the forum, it talks about that we all have different terrain. And this is something that you guys will become very accustomed to as you move on in the program. And it's something that we call constitution or essence, in that everybody is given different amounts by their parents. You can chalk it up to genetics, maybe, is what you can kind of translate that to. But it's also where our parents were at our conception. What kind of substances were they using? Were they happy? Were they sad? What were they experiencing? Did they just have a loss? All these kind of things are very important as the fetus is forming in Chinese medicine. And it's unfortunate that this is something that we have to take into equation, because that means that you can kind of already have been dealt a bum hand by the time you were born. But that's exactly how life is, unfortunately. And we explore that a little bit more as you learn more about the medicine. But it's important to approach every patient with the idea that they may not have as much essence or as the next person. And that's why he means is we're not all created equal. And that's why we have the questionnaires in the clinic and in our paperwork about what were your parents doing when you were created. It talks about, if your mother was a smoker, if your mother was into drugs, if they were in an abusive relationship. The same with the father. These things are very important energetically to the essence, to the jing of a baby. That's what we call it in Chinese. It's that jing, essence, terrain. And it's so important to approach everyone that they are not all created equal. And it sounds mean when you say it that way, but it's not. It's the idea, it's keeping that in the back of your mind, that how much was this person given to start off with? And it's not so that we could look down on them, it's just that everybody's normal is different. Like, I grew up a very sheltered child because I was very ill. And so I wasn't out partying and drinking all the time. And I still, if I ate a bad food, then I'd be sick for a week. Whereas I know people in my same age range at the same time that could go out drinking the whole time during high school and they'd be absolutely fine, and they could do drugs and they could do all this kind of stuff. They had a different essence. They were pulling from a different pool than I was. And so as you dive deeper into the medicine, you'll see that my normal and your normal are vastly different. And our job is to find out the normal for that patient. And that goes to the pulse as well. If I'm feeling my pulse and then I'm feeling a 6'4" man's pulse, the normal for us is very drastically different. My pulse is not going to feel the same as his if we're both healthy. There's no way. Our vessels are different. Like, our very vessels are different. And that means that our very basic, our foundation is different as well. The things I can get away with, they might not be able to get away with, and vice versa. And that's why we have to really kind of investigate and find out, where's the start point with these patients? Where is the healthy normal for them, and where is underactive and overactive and all that? So you're exploring this. You're not just discovering, like, oh, where's your pain at? You're finding out about this person at their very core, at their foundation. Does anybody have any questions about that, about the difference of people not being created equal? Yeah? And you'll realize that as you're seeing more people, that those things, that like even emotional trauma completely changes how a person approaches the world. If someone their mother experiences a great loss while the baby is being carried, that can be transferred on. And that's something to not just put over, Because if you think about accidents, like if someone was in a terrible accident in their car while they were pregnant, then that could possibly affect the child. But this type of medicine incorporates body, mind, and spirit. So we can't just ignore the emotional traumas. We can't ignore the environmental traumas. And that's what I really love about this medicine, is that it's not just everybody gets the same pill. It's where does your start at? And what can we do to make your normal better? I probably will never have the same energy as some other people. Let's find my normal. And I think that's a really beautiful part of it, because it not only gives people hope, but it also gives people a better vision of what the possibility is. You know, we're not giving people false hope either. Like, this is what you were given. It's kind of a downer a little bit, if you think about it. Like I said, but you're reminding people that their lifestyle is their responsibility because they don't have as much. I can't go out and do as much as other people do, and I'm not like a thrill seeker and stuff like that, but those things you'll find, like being a thrill seeker is kind of a pathology in Chinese medicine, and that's a certain type of person. And that's not me. That is not me. I don't even like going in the ocean. And it's because I'm protecting my Jing, because I know mine's weaker than everybody else's. Do you guys understand what I'm saying? I'm using myself as an example because that's who I am. But I know other people that can be thrill seekers, and they can live this super dangerous lifestyle, and they're way healthier than me. And why is that? Why when I feel their pulse, even though they're doing all these crazy things, I like to think of like 70s rockers. Those people are indestructible. And I'm like, man, they must have a great Jing. They must have great Jing. Yeah, exactly. They're out there doing it all, and they probably are going to outlive me. Like, that's the difference between our foundations. And everybody's is different, and it could be so different from child to child. That's why on our questionnaire we ask where you fit into the sibling hierarchy. So I'm the third child. My mom had me 10 years after my first sibling. Your Jing decreases as you get older, and that means that you can give less to your children. Same with fathers. And then also, at every time you have a child, it decreases more. So being the caboose, I kind of got set up for failure there. I don't blame my mother. I love my mother.
I was going to say, so we just blame everything on our
Yeah,
parents.
absolutely blame everything on our parents. That's a great thing. But yeah, sorry I can't go out tonight. My mom was really, she was really old when she had me.
I'm the third kid. I'm sorry.
I can't. So these are things that we have to keep in mind when we're talking to people, and when they're sitting in front of us and they're like, I just don't understand why I don't have the same oomph as everybody else. Well, now you can tell them. Everybody's created not equally, unfortunately. Let's see if we have a person. You're ready. So this is Jamin. Jamin was the one that taught me pulse and taught me the basics of Chinese medicine, so I'm a little bit partial. I really love him. He's been close with Dr. Hammer for many years. He's going to talk to you about that. Such a sweet and gentle soul, and I'm so excited for you guys to meet. If I let him in. We'll see. How do I let him in?
Everybody go up to his name. Yeah.
Hi, Jamin.
Shannon,
How are
how are
you?
you?
I'm great.
Very nice to see you.
It's very nice to see you. I'm going to turn you around so you can see the CDM 101 class, but thank you for joining us today.
It's my pleasure.
Okay. All right, Jamin, this is them. I'm going to let you talk to them about how you use CDM in your practice and how it has changed your practice. You can kind of see some of them. There we go.
Hi.
I wish I could.
How is everybody?
Pretty good.
Good.
So, well, CDM. So, I imagine there's different reasons you guys have found your way into the Dragon Rises College over here, but I would imagine that at least part of it is to understand what comm is in a fashion. And And so I began studying with Dr. Hammer back in the late 90s. I had graduated from a school that preceded Dragon Rises, and while I was still a student there, I had the opportunity to actually travel out to California to do what was considered a master course with Dr. Hammer in learning pulse diagnosis. And so I would go out there once a month for about like a long weekend, and just truly amazed me the ideas of the things that we could use the pulse for to really help better understand the patients we work with, and really helped me significantly in understanding myself in a lot of ways as well. So I had some experience at the school. I used to teach over there. I think I taught there for like 14, 15 years. I was one of the primary pulse teachers and helped to design the pulse curriculum at the school. And since then, I have my practice now over in the Atlantic, Florida, and I've also been getting to teach pulse overseas to, interestingly enough, to the Chinese. I've actually been going to China and Europe, well, pre-pandemic anyway, and getting the opportunity to, if you will, kind of bring this pulse system back to its home, its source, which to me is a tremendous honor to have that opportunity. But I think, I'm really excited actually about this class that you guys are having, because at this point I expect that there's not a whole lot you know in any great depth about Chinese medicine. And this class will hopefully give you kind of a inspiration that will move when you continue your studies throughout to help improve your appreciation for some of the kind of subtleties that aren't always clearly explained in the books, but are really more based on a kind of experience. So one of the things that when I first started studying with Dr. Hammer, I wanted to know all the details, like all the facts. And the class that I was in, there were a lot of much more advanced practitioners than me as the student that I was still. And I would find myself wanting to speed the process of the class along, because I was very impatient to learn everything I could. And so I would answer a lot of the questions, not so much to make myself feel like I knew everything or to try to project that, but because I wanted to move things along faster. And it took me a long time to realize that a lot of what Dr. Hammer was teaching, even though the details and the facts are important, it took me a long time to realize that the stories that he told and the things that were kind of behind what led to his way of thinking were really the true heart of what he was trying to teach. And so you're going to hear and see different things. The words diagnosis is going to get brought up, for example. When Dr. Hammer taught the CDM class, I was actually fortunate enough to be his assistant for a number of years in the early stages that he was doing that. But when he taught the CDM class, there were a couple of things, just a single word, like in large print, that were plastered on the walls in the classroom. One of them was diagnosis, and he'd be like, diagnosis, 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 and really stressing that it's so important to really kind of understand what diagnosis of a patient would be, instead of just focusing on treating a symptom. And in a lot of ways, you'll see certainly in modern medicine, but really oftentimes in a lot of push of how Chinese medicine is being used, is really kind of being focused more on symptom treatment. And when you really start to understand the conditions, it gives you a chance to go a little bit further back and ask yourself, well, why are these conditions here? And that brings us to another one of the key words that he had on a single sheet of paper plastered on the wall in the classroom, and that was lifestyle. And lifestyle comes into play in the sense that if you don't understand how your patient's lifestyle factors into their health and their well-being, you're really limited on the help you can provide them. If what they're doing on a day-to-day basis is contributing to whatever conditions are going on that are causing them a kind of disease, then you're missing a key point in the picture to really be able to help them. And so Dr. Shen, I think, was even known, one of the statements he would sometimes make to his patients was when a patient would come back get better, he would kind of admonish his patients, saying, "Your fault, not mine. What you do." And the implication was if the patient did not get better with what he was providing them, there was something that they were doing in their life that was inhibiting it. So very, very important to really understand people's life in that manner. Whether it's their diet and how that's contributing to the situation, whether it's their work, and a lot of times people are doing things even that they think are serving them well. Maybe they're eating like their smoothie every day with all the extra nutrition in it, but it's also very cold and their spleen chi is very weak, and they don't recognize how, even though they have all the best ingredients in the smoothie, that their body's really not capable of absorbing it. And so you can help to get them to think about things in a different way, and I find that to be a very rewarding part of this, is helping people understand how their lives impact their day-to-day well-being. And no patient you ever see is going to completely fit into the books that you have and that you study with. You'll have certain parts that fit, absolutely, but we're all much more complex than what a book is going to be able to teach you by itself. And so you're going to have to learn from the books. You're going to have to also depend on the different experiences you have, the experiences of why you're learning in the classroom, the experiences from when you go into the student clinic, and ultimately, hopefully, when you go into your own clinic. But it's not just your experience. You can't just do something because that's what worked the last time. You really have to look at how somebody presents themselves at this immediate moment in time, and to really be able to connect with them on that deeper kind of level. And the pulse is a huge, huge benefit for this. One of the very unique things about Dragon Rises College is the pulse diagnosis system that it teaches over there. So for example, there's a lot of information, of course, you get from the pulse, the chi, the blood, the body fluids, the emotional state, the different systems, the different zangfu organs. There's a huge, huge amount of diagnostic information, but honestly, one of the things that I find so valuable is the way I have my practice set up. When I first see a patient, I don't look at the form they gave me that shows any of the history. I don't ask them any questions as far as why they're here. The first thing I do is I take their pulse. Usually it takes me about a half hour, 45 minutes to get a complete pulse finished, and I schedule my initial exams to accommodate that. But I take a complete pulse, and then I look at their tongue. Well, actually, I like to take a picture of their tongue. And what I do from there is I will show the patient their tongue, and I'm like, you want to see what your tongue means? And I give them an overview of some of the things that the tongue tells me. And then I go into the pulse and I give them a little bit of feedback as far as some of the key parts of what the pulse tells me. And in some cases, there might be, again, sort of mental, emotional, sort of almost spiritual aspects of it. Recently, I might go off on tangents here. If Shannon remembers me as a teacher, she'll probably know that I'm pretty good at going off on tangents. But recently I had a patient, for example, a new patient who had a very significant amount of rough vibration on her pulse. And it also showed that her heart position, both the primary position, a lot of the complementary positions related to the heart were pretty significantly compromised. I had mentioned to her the idea about the heart shock in relation to profound kind of event or possibly multitude of events that happened, and I suspected it was probably sometime in the more recent future because of the high degree of vibration that I was finding on her pulse. And so when I'm feeling this high, strong, rough vibration on the pulse, I'm thinking this kind of heart shock condition that started years. And when we have these kind of shocks to our heart, it can be like a block to really being able to recover from things that may not have any obvious correlations to the heart even. When I was talking to this person about that, she confided in me about a couple of things that were very significant to her. Her son, a few years prior, had passed away. And as you can assume, parents aren't generally supposed to outlive their children, and that was an extremely profound shock. On top of that, in the more recent time, her husband had left her for a much younger woman, and they had just gotten divorced because of that situation. And so all of this comes out by me just expressing some of the things that I was finding in her pulse. And in doing that in a way where I'm not going, well, I think this or I think that, but really saying, well, the pulse is giving, it implies that this could be something going on. It creates a kind of trust, I feel, between myself and the patient that will allow the work that we can do together to be much more profound. So again, I've always found the pulse to be very beneficial for helping to really establish that relationship with my patients in a way that I feel like will be more beneficial, honestly, for the both of us. Like I said, one of my little tangents there. So coming back, so there are other things. It's not important to go into too much of the details with their pulse at this point, but I just wanted to stress that part of the pulse of how important it can be to connect with our patients on a much deeper level. There's a lot of other things that you might see bits and pieces of in some of your books, but that aren't really stressed, or actually you might actually see them in more actual books now. As I'm part of the COM Foundation, which kind of oversees the Dr. Hammer's work, and the COM Foundation has recently put out a couple of books that go into some of these concepts in much greater detail. And there's actually a couple more that are going to be on the way pretty soon. There's a lifestyle one that I'm really excited about, and one on the triple burner. But anyway, that's sorry, lost my thought there. Look, a bird. Speaking of birds, here's another tangent. One of the things, if you guys are curious, one of Dr. Hammer's passions, and he can't do it so much anymore. He's 97 years old, but one of his passions was always birding. I had a couple of wonderful occasions to do some birding with him, and it since then has become one of my passions as well too. Well, let's go back to some other words that you would see on Dr. Hammer's classroom wall. He liked to include, I guess this was 2 words on a single page, but it was stress and terrain. And this was something that also really, really helped me think about things in a way that was different than what I got from most of the books. And when we're talking about terrain in this context, we're essentially talking about one's constitution, their sort of inherent sort of constitutional strength in this manner. And when we're talking about stress, ultimately we're talking about life. I mean, we can't eliminate stress. Good things are stress. You win the lottery, that's a stress. And things that we have zero control over are stresses. The weather is a stress on our system. But some things we do have control over with stresses as well in terms of our lifestyle and our diet and so on. But the idea of stress and terrain has to do with one of the most important parts of looking at people as individuals. The stress is really talking about, so we know stress is life in essence, and terrain is how much stress somebody can tolerate before the system starts to break down. So we can have like if these are the 2 levels, here's our stress and here's our terrain. If we have terrain that's much stronger, we can handle a lot more stress before it crosses that threshold to where symptoms will actually start to develop, where disease actually starts to develop. But with somebody whose terrain is way down here, you don't need a whole lot of stress to, maybe they just didn't get a good night's sleep and that's enough. Or maybe they ate something that wasn't wrong or that was bad, for, wasn't the right thing for their type, and that set them back significantly. It explains how you have some people who will apparently be able to just abuse themselves and not pay any consequences. I kind of think of it as the George Burns syndrome. I don't know if you guys remember that old comedian from way back when, but every time you saw him with a drink in one hand and a cigar in the other hand. Granted, that it's very possible that was more his public persona and that wasn't something that he consistently partaked in. But the idea would be you have somebody who lives to that long and maintains a relatively good amount of health and is still abusing that with his lifestyle. So somebody like that has a very, very strong constitution and can handle things at a much more significant level. But there's always a breaking point. And it's important when we speak with our patients to help them understand that concept. So they're not comparing what how they can work. They should be able to work 80 hours a week because their neighbor does, and they should be able to eat all the food they want because their spouse does. Or it helps people to understand that they're going to be the best barometer of what their level of moderation is. I think Confucius is usually credited with the phrase moderation in all things. The pulse can really help your patients understand what that moderation is for themselves and how to moderate that moderation on a day-to-day basis depending on essentially how they feel. But I'm not so far off my list of notes and things that I was like, oh, this will be a good thing to talk about. But actually, this is, and again, I guess it's kind of a tangent, so forgive me in that department. But I had a really, really cool experience with a patient not that long ago. And it was a patient that often comes in and presents with on their pulse with a very large inflation in their left side diaphragm and a very big full overflowing quality to their liver pulse and very weak lung pulse. And so there's a couple things that come to mind with that. One is a liver lung block where the qi doesn't flow from the liver channel to the lung channel and gives us this kind of potentially false sort of indication of a weakness in the lungs and the upper jaw as a whole, because the chi's just not getting up there. The other, with the large left side diaphragm, it implies that probably because of the stagnation in part with the liver chi, it's impacting the diaphragm's ability to move up and down, and oftentimes that comes on when we are angry at somebody that we're close to, that we care about. This wouldn't necessarily apply with like a colleague. This would be more related to, like, maybe it's a family member, maybe it's a close friend, maybe it's well, actually, we oftentimes in the earlier days, we would refer to this pulse as the divorce pulse, with the idea that when we find a very large inflated there, it could mean that you're having to focus on the things that make you angry about your significant other, because you're trying to make that break from them in order to be able to go through with a divorce. Where if we are focusing on all the good times that we have in those situations, you can't really make that separation, you can't really make that break. So coming back to the patient that I have, a lot of times the inflation there, it had to do with the dynamics of with her siblings, and sometimes her children. Granted, let's a little background. This person is in their 70s, so their kids are all grown and everything, but still have issues where they're generally depending on her, probably more than she would prefer. One of her sisters in particular is an interesting dynamic where they're very different from kind of political points of view, but they still get together and spend time together very regularly. And there's almost like the dynamic of her having to bite her tongue and not saying things that would stir things up in that side of things of their relationship had a very strong impact on her. So as many times as she would come in, I would treat her, and the liver lung block would go away, and the big diaphragm would settle down on her pulse. And she left feeling much better, much more relaxed, much more easygoing. But so often when I saw her the next time, it would be back again. And so she comes in one time and it's not. I'm like, wow, this is doing so much better. Or you must really be doing, not focusing on those issues with your sister and so on anymore. She's like, yeah, I've been doing really well with this. And so I'm feeling her pulse, and then all of a sudden it's back again, just like that. And the reason this was so significant to me is I always assumed that in order for these findings to show up on the pulse, it took like time. It was like a cumulative kind of building effect. And when I felt that change, I was like, so what happened? What were you just thinking? And she was thinking about her sister in one of these uncomfortable ways. And when I explained that to her and how significant it was for me, I was like, oh my gosh. When we're talking about the power of our thoughts, it can take a single thought and your pulse can change like that. And so it's not just practicing meditation and other things to help kind of have a better few moments as far as having a peaceful mind. It's every single moment, every single day, your thoughts are so powerful. They can change your pulse like that. And with that understanding, that was, again, profound for myself, but it was also profound for this patient. And she has been doing phenomenally better since she's literally has been taking a very pointed effort in changing how she thinks, and her health has been improving dramatically because of that. So again, I don't know how much of a tangent I'm going off there, but that was just a really, really significant, profound thing for both me and her, and certainly some other patients at this point in time as well. But so really, I mean, I feel like I can go on and on just kind of bringing up random concepts associated with contemporary Oriental medicine here, but you're going to hear a lot about these. I think you've gotten to hear from Dr. Hammer already and Barbara Hammer, who, to the best of our understanding, probably isn't a true blood relationship to Dr. Hammer, but we'll pretend there might be a little bit anyway. Barbara Hammer is excellent, though. I'm not sure if there's anybody else you've had a chance to hear from yet or not, but I'd like to actually give, if we still have time, Shannon can tell me otherwise, but I'd like to give a few moments if there's any questions about anything, either from my experience working with Dr. Hammer or my thoughts on any questions. Can I offer a few moments for any questions?
Absolutely. Does anybody have any questions about common concepts?
No questions.
No.
Oh my gosh.
I have a question, but
Okay.
it's not related to common, well, it's kind of related to common concepts.
Sorry, I moved this stuff. Yeah.
Oh,
You
okay.
want to come up
Hi.
and
Sure.
can you hear him from there?
Okay.
I did not hear too well, so
Okay.
Okay,
can
here I
you
come.
repeat that, please?
Sure. Hi. Well, I didn't actually ask you yet. Mine is not exactly calm, but I came here because I'm interested in the pulse. And I was wondering, since this is the first semester and we don't get to actually studying the pulse for another year, basically, are there things that we can do now to begin preparing ourselves for studying it later?
To begin preparing yourself for studying for the pulse, that's
Yeah.
a good question. Well, I actually have a funny story of the original school that I went to. It's called Florida School of Acupuncture and Oriental Medicine. The school consisted it had a significant 5-element track within the program, as well as a TCM track that kind of ran side by side. But the pulse that we were basically studying was more 5-element style, which is certainly has its place in time, but relative to the system is a lot more simplistic. It's kind of checking just the superficial, deep layers of the 6 primary positions to get a sense of the channel flow of the 12 different primary channels. And so we were told that we had to go out and feel like 2,000 pulses. I don't know, go over to like UF and grab a student and say, hey, let me feel your pulse. And I honestly felt that to be a complete waste of my time. I was very frustrated by it, and I actually, it led me feeling like I wanted to learn everything else I could so I didn't have to depend on these stupid pulses. My point being is that obviously my opinion changed when I started learning the shen-hammer pulse system. It probably wouldn't hurt to just feel pulses and just kind of ask yourself some basic questions as you're feeling the pulse don't worry about the different positions, just feel the radial artery and ask yourself some few very basic questions. One would have to do about the volume that you're feeling, and that's basically when you feel the pulse, does it have does it have like force when it hits your fingers? Does it feel strong? Does it feel big? Or is it hard to palpate? Does it feel very reduced in its volume, very reduced in its nature? And you can, there's multitude of layers of what the different qualities are that are more forceful and what the different qualities are that are more reduced. But just starting to kind of train your fingers to think from one to the other in that manner will be helpful. You can also, which somewhat coincides with this, but not exactly, you can start recognizing when you have to, in some cases, you're going to find that you have to press a lot deeper. And other times you're going to find you can feel the pulse very superficial. And just kind of start training yourself to think like, how far do I have to push before I get a real sensation of the pulse here? Some different things you can consider. I'm basically going over different categories of the pulse that we consider. So width would be another category that I would look at. And so when you're feeling the pulse, you basically are asking yourself, does it have a wide nature to it or does it have a narrow nature? structure to it. Stability would be another one of significance. And by stability, if you sit there and you feel the pulse for even just a few minutes, you may start to notice certain things that relate to the stability. Maybe the pulse doesn't stay the same. It's changing. Every beat changes a little bit, where sometimes it feels stronger, then it feels weaker, then it feels deeper, then it feels... when it shifts every beat like that, you probably have just discovered what the amplitude change pulse feels like. When you may also find within the rhythm part there could be, or the stability part, there could be, and this falls into rhythm as well, I guess, but there could be misbeats or whether it stays steady. The misbeats has a special kind of significance, as well as when the rate itself actually changes while you're feeling it. Sometimes you can feel the pulse, and if you pay attention, you feel the beats come on quicker, and then they start to slow down. And this isn't the kind of thing that you would notice if you check the rate multiple times during a sitting with somebody. It's more you literally feel it speed up and slow down while the pulse is under your fingertips. Some other things you might consider, so let's see, we got rate, rhythm, stability, the depth, the volume. A big part would have to do more with, as the pulse goes across your fingers, does it have more of a kind of smoothness to it? Or sometimes when the pulse goes across your fingers, it has more of a jagged, rough, or vibration kind of quality to it. And so just kind of ask yourself, does that feel like it flows smooth across my fingers, or does that feel like it has more of a rough kind of sensation? And again, I'm sure you can look in your books and try to torture yourself and well, what quality is this? What quality is that? But if you could just start thinking about some of the different categories that we differentiate the pulse with, without being concerned about what the actual qualities are, I think that could do a significant amount of benefit for when you actually do start training and studying the pulse system itself.
Cool.
Is that does that a worthwhile question, answer to your question?
Yes, thank you. If you can't hear me, please.
He says yes, thank you.
Good. Are there any other questions or just anything anybody wants to ask me?
Nobody's going to ask, but I want to ask about China.
Okay. I can play it.
But I don't know anything specific. I'd just like to know about what he was doing in
They
China.
would like to know about your endeavors in China. What was
My
that?
endeavors in China?
Yeah.
Well, honestly, most of it has been teaching. I've gone there, let's see, I think I started doing this back in 2017, and so up until 2000, or up until the pandemic essentially, I was going about twice a year for up to almost a month at a time to teach classes. And I don't speak Chinese. I mean, I can recognize a few words. I can recognize some of the pulse qualities, some of the pulse positions, even like sometimes they'll refer to the three primary areas of the pulses, the sun, the guan, and the chur. And I can recognize, I've tried to train myself to know all of the herbs and their pinyin name. And so I could recognize when herbs are being taught. But basically I would have somebody who's Chinese who's been my co-teacher in this process, and she'll do the translation and everything, and she's also an excellent practitioner herself. She used to teach at Pacific College of Oriental Medicine over in San Diego, where she lives, and is an excellent herbalist, one of the best herbalists I haven't come across. My first trip was in Kunming, which was kind of interesting in that Dr. Hammer, when he went to China, I believe it was in the early 90s, if I remember correctly. He described Kunming as like one of his favorite parts of all places he saw. So really, really appreciated the culture. It's a little different than some other areas of China. Sometimes it's referred to as the eternal spring because its temperature remains, its climate remains fairly temperate all year round. And so whatever time of year, it's usually thought of as fairly comfortable. But there's also a lot of different, China as a whole is predominantly the Han Chinese. And in Kunming, you get a lot of the different other kind of Chinese groups and cultures from varying regions that have all sort of moved into, have over the however many centuries have kind of settled into that area. And so you get a lot more diversity, a lot more culture from that end, which was kind of interesting. But honestly, my experience there was nothing like Dr. Hammer's experience in that things have been built up so quickly and dramatically. What was, I think, a lot more just forest and grassland, you now see tons and tons of high rises, a lot of which I think the anticipation of was misunderstood, and so you have a lot of these high rises that are essentially empty. But it was still a really, really good experience nonetheless. And from there, my next class that I went to was in Shenyang, which is a very, very different part of China. It's in the northern part, it's like north of North Korea. And we went there, this was kind of actually interesting, we went there in early March. And so in China, with a lot of the buildings there, there's a set standard of when the heat is no longer allowed to be used, or when the AC is no longer allowed to be used. And this was an unseasonably cold winter, and so that doesn't really come into play with when the heat is no longer allowed to be used in these buildings. And so it was fairly cold in the room that we were set up to have the class. And one of the things that was really fascinating to me is I'm actually involved with Dr. Hammer right now, and as you're probably aware of, the big pulse book that he first wrote, and there was a revised copy too. You can probably see some copies in the library at the school there, but they've been out of print for, I don't know, maybe 10 years, if somewhere in that area. But I'm actually involved with Dr. Hammer in revising the book right now for it to be reprinted. And one of the things that in the book that can use a little bit of clarification is the floating quality. And during my trip to Shenyang, where we had this unseasonably cold weather with no heat allotted in the room that we were in. So everybody's wearing like their scarves, their gloves, their hats, but essentially you could see pretty much everybody had wind cold. And I apologize if you haven't gone through enough of the program to understand what that means, but wind cold is kind of the Chinese medicine way of saying you have the common cold. Your runny nose, sniffling nose, maybe your throat's a little scratchy, maybe feeling a bit chilled. Possibly some sneezing, maybe a little bit of fatigue, but again, you'll get into that later on, I'm sure. But so very, very clearly, like everybody has acute wind cold in this situation, and it's common to find a certain kind of floating quality on the pulse with that. And so it was during this trip, and I've studied this pulse system for like 22 years, I think now. And to be able to really, at that point, really have hit home the true understanding of the floating quality was very, very profound for me. And so I always appreciate Shenyang for that reason. Otherwise, I've been to Shanghai a couple of times. I've been to Shenzhen. Shenzhen is fairly close to Hong Kong, and actually one of the trips I went to, I have a close friend who's a chef in Hong Kong, and has been actually, I think he's like the head chef of 2 restaurants at this point now. But I actually got to take some time and go visit with him, which Hong Kong was a really, really interesting place. You think of it as like a huge, big city if you've never been there, but there's also a huge amount of Hong Kong that's actually protected and preserved, and did these amazing hikes like through the mountains over there, and realized how out of shape I was. But that part was really cool. Shenzhen was also kind of interesting for me. Is my stepbrother, who's about 8 years younger than me, who he had actually been living in China for probably 10 years or so. And originally he was living in Beijing, but he had relocated to Shenzhen, and that was pure coincidental that we had our classes in Shenzhen where he was living. And so I actually got to meet up with him in China with his fiance, and that was a really exciting, kind of interesting aspect. Something actually too that was very cool. One of my trips there, the class was in Shenzhen, but we went to my teaching partner and I, Zhang is her name. She lives again in San Diego. We went to Shanghai to meet with Ding Ye. Dr. Ding is from the Ding system comes from, but interestingly enough, even though that's where the lineage of the whole pulse system, the pulse system historically was only taught like father-son, with a kind of break in that where Ding Ganren bypassed his son and taught it to his grandson, Ding Jiwan. And Ding Jiwan wealth was a very important part of his life and his what he was looking for. And so he took on a handful of apprentices for exuberant sums of money to teach them. And that's basically how Dr. Shen came into play in learning this pulse system, is he was one of Ding Jiwan's apprentices. And Dr. Shen's family at the time was like one of the wealthiest families in China, from my understanding. Interestingly enough, though, to the best of our understanding, we know at least 2 of the other apprentices were actually shot and killed in Hong Kong when Dr. Shen was walking in between them. And there was I think it was Japanese at the time, it was in the early 40s, I believe, but Japanese was invading Hong Kong. And was just basically, there's snipers just picking people off in the streets. And they missed Dr. Shen. And that, from what Dr. Hammer says, Dr. Shen made a commitment to meditating every day and really kind of got more into the more spiritual part of his life after that occurrence, that he felt very grateful to be alive. But I believe there may have been one other apprentice as well, but what we can gather, that apprentice never shared the information with anybody. Dr. Shen ultimately ended up in New York, where Dr. Hammer met him, and I won't get into that whole story itself, other than when Dr. Hammer saw him and watched him take a pulse, and how the things that he knew from that pulse, Dr. Hammer wanted to, no matter what, wanted to learn this from this person. And Dr. Shen had no interest whatsoever in teaching anybody, but Dr. Shen needed a Western doctor to open up a clinic, and Dr. Hammer agreed to help him in this manner if he taught him the pulse. And so, as I said, I like going off on tangents. So to the best of our understanding, even though I'm talking about the Ding family as part of the whole Meng He kind of lineage, which included the four prestigious families in an area not far outside of Shanghai that were very well renowned in the medical field throughout the centuries in China. And so we met with Dr. Ding, who took us to a museum that's being built about the entire Hmong lineage. And so we got to go to this museum and see all of these different kind of artifacts related to the different families over there. And if you're talking about one of the neat parts of my experiences in China, that certainly qualifies. It was really quite fascinating. Someday I'll have to go through my photos and give a few to the school or something that they might be able to post them, or I don't know. I don't really use social media anymore, so I don't really get things onto Facebook or anything like that. But I don't know. Does that tell you a little bit about my experiences in China? Most of the time, I honestly was just teaching there, and it was like we started really early. We usually even come back after dinner to practice some more, and so I'd usually have like one out of like every 5 to 7 days while I was there. Maybe I got to be taken to somewhere and see something, kind of thing.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Well, I think we're out of time, Jamin, but thank you so much for coming.
I'm sorry, I probably kept you guys.
No,
Thank
we're
you,
running
Shannon.
time. Yes, it's so good to
fantastic.
see you. Yeah, so good to see
It's
you.
lovely to see you. Thank you. Have a wonderful day, and my best to all of you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. All right.
Everyone stop clapping at the same time.
All right. You guys can go ahead and take a 10-minute